He said he'll take the cutest kitten. Imagine his face when they brought him a alien cat girl. The corridor hums with sterile light, the walls reflecting subtle neon hues from countless containment tanks lined up like silent sentinels. A faint mechanical whir echoes in the distance, punctuated only by the whisper of Callum's boots on the polished floor. He halts abruptly at the sight of the last tank on the left. Inside stands a figure unlike any he's ever encountered, ears perked high, neon green hair brushing slender shoulders, a slender tail coiled in restrained tension. Her gaze is locked on him, eyes glowing with challenge. He shifts his stance, a quiet breath hissing through clenched teeth. She cocks her head, lips curving in what could be a silent taunt. "Not what you were expecting." Her voice is smooth as oil, yet sharp enough to cut. She doesn't blink. He holds back any immediate reaction, lets the silence stretch a beat, then smirks, a reflex in the face of danger, a habit honed by countless missions. "I was told I'd be picking up a cute little stray," he finally answers, voice low. "You look like a problem instead." A twitch of her tail shows she's not intimidated. The door slides open with a hiss, and she steps out. The overhead lights catch on the sleek black outfit hugging her form, reflecting each subtle shift of muscle. She moves closer. There's a challenge in her stride. Callum watches her approach, ready if she attacks, but also oddly intrigued by how each step seems deliberate, predatory, yet somehow graceful. "I'm Saphira," she offers, not a greeting but more of a warning. "You're in over your head, human." He offers her no name in return, only a measuring glare. "Careful," he says, letting the warning rest in his voice. I bite back. She bares her teeth in something akin to a grin, the tips of what look like slightly sharpened canines peeking out. Her ears flick forward, neon hair swaying around her sharp cheekbones. "I claw," she counters. Then she turns, scanning the corridor with a flicker of interest, as though she's already deciding whether to leave him behind or use him to her advantage. He tries to keep his gaze steady, but he can't help tracking the movement of that tail. It's mesmerizing in its own alien way, and the fact that he notices annoys him. He's here for a contract, not a curiosity. The idea that they brought out someone, so obviously lethal instead of a harmless exotic pet sets off warning sirens in his head. But his mission was always about infiltration. Find the ring that traffics in illegal alien species, gather intel, and feed it back to the few contacts he trusts. He never expected to be forced into receiving a living, breathing, and obviously intelligent asset. She stops beside him, stands too close. "You were told you'd get a kitten," she purrs, her voice dipping into a low, thrumming vibration. "But I'm no one's pet." Her proximity reveals a subtle fragrance, not overpowering, but enough to stir something in his gut. He refuses to give her the satisfaction of stepping away, even though every muscle in his body goes tense. "You think I want this?" he mutters, sarcasm curling in his throat. "I was just—" He doesn't finish. Something about her expression dares him to keep talking, dares him to show too much. Instead, he nods at the corridor. "Let's move." They walk in tense silence, Saphira slightly ahead. He wonders if she's leading him or if he's leading her. It feels ambiguous, a tug-of-war of wills. The facility is labyrinthine, glowing containment pods, overhead catwalks, and automated drones sliding along the ceiling on quiet rails. Occasionally, there's the beep of security systems. He keeps his sidearm holstered but ready. She spares a glance at the weapon, one brow arching as though to say, "You think that'll help you?" He ignores her expression, focusing instead on the path. Yet he can't quite shut out the persistent sense of her presence, an electric awareness that lingers in the air. It's not just the tension of two fighters testing each other, it's more primal. His mind flickers back to old warnings about certain alien species having ways to entice humans, ways that go beyond mere physical allure. He's not falling for it. He steels himself and presses on. They reach an intersection. Red lights flicker along the walls, signifying a higher security zone. A heavy metal door bars their way. He glances at the keypad, his smirk returning. "Stay out of the way," he instructs softly, stepping forward to hack it. But she's right there, pressing close, her voice humming near his ear. "You're too slow," she murmurs. Before he can snap back, she extends a claw-like nail from her index finger, jabs it deftly into a hidden panel. Sparks crackle. The door slides open, revealing a scene of chaos beyond. A startled guard at a control station whirls around, face blanching at the sight of Saphira and her menacing posture. She tenses to leap, but Callum is already moving. He's across the threshold in a heartbeat, cracking the guard across the jaw with the hilt of his sidearm. The man crumples without so much as a shout. Saphira lands beside him in a silent crouch, her tail lashing with excitement. She looks disappointed there wasn't more of a fight. "All that skill," she observes, brushing an errant strand of green hair aside. "Wasted on a single guard." He levels her with a cold stare, the overhead lights gleaming off his dark hair. "Would you rather I let them sound an alarm?" Her grin is dark, almost mischievous. "I'd rather you let me have some fun." He shakes his head, stepping over the unconscious figure to access the console. The readout flickers in alien script, then cycles through to a language he recognizes. He taps at the interface, searching for a route out. He's aware of her presence behind him, aware that if she chose, she could sink those nails into his back. The only reason she hasn't is because she needs him. For now. They move on. Every corridor is a potential ambush. The deeper they go, the more it becomes clear that Saphira wasn't just an accidental catch. This place was built to contain something as dangerous as her. The reinforced doors, the thick glass of the pods, and the alert systems that now flash across the screens all hint that her presence here was no simple sale item. He tries to keep his mind on the mission. He's here to uncover the ring's hideouts, to find the higher-ups who orchestrate the trafficking. But with Saphira at his side, the plan is thrown into disarray. He never expected to walk out with the prime target in tow, let alone an alien who can dismantle a door lock with a single flick of her nail. The tension between them is thick, almost tangible, a constant push and pull that has him second-guessing every glance, every step. They come upon another checkpoint. This time, 4 guards stand watch. They've heard something amiss, or perhaps they've been alerted by a subtle change in the facility's systems. Callum catches sight of them first, pressing himself flat against the wall. He motions for her to hold. She doesn't obey. Instead, she steps forward, tail flicking with predatory interest. He grits his teeth. He wants to snarl at her to stand down, but there's no time. The guards notice movement. "Stop!" one of them barks, raising a weapon. Laser sights crisscross in the hallway. Saphira moves in a blur. She springs forward, vaulting off a wall in a display of acrobatic grace that leaves them gaping. Callum curses under his breath and charges in from the opposite side, a flanking maneuver. The combined assault is swift. Saphira slashes the first guard across the weapon arm with her extended claws, disarming him in a spray of sparks as the energy rifle clatters away. Callum fires 2 shots, taking down the second guard with precise, non-lethal blasts to the torso. The third tries to radio for backup, but Saphira is already on him, a spinning kick sending him crashing into the bulkhead. The fourth aims at Callum, trembling, uncertain. Callum stares down the muzzle of the rifle, calm. He waits for the guard to hesitate. Then in a single fluid motion, he twists the weapon aside and slams the butt of his gun across the guard's jaw. The man collapses. In seconds, the hall is silent again, except for the hum of flickering lights. Saphira smirks, flicking her tail. "Not bad for a human." She sounds almost pleased, as though she's found a suitable partner in destruction. He shakes his head. "We're not here for that." He gestures to the unconscious guards. "We need to be out before the place goes into full lockdown." She swipes a finger through the air. "Lead on, then." He should question how she got here in the first place, who specifically put her up for auction, but he suspects she won't answer. Not yet. Her gaze flicks to the nearest corridor, where an emergency strobe pulses ominously. Time is short. They need to escape before the facility clamps down, but there's a catch. He can't just walk out. He came here for intel, and if he leaves without it, the entire mission is wasted. He has to find the command center. He makes a snap decision, heading toward a lift at the end of the corridor. She strides beside him, not exactly following his lead, more like walking her own path parallel to his. Their footsteps resonate against metal floors, an unsynchronized duet that mirrors the shaky alliance they've formed. Inside the lift, tension hangs thick. He tries to ignore the warmth radiating from her proximity. Her skin, tinted a faint greenish glow under the overhead lights, looks impossibly smooth. Her pupils narrow as she peers at him, searching for any sign of weakness. She finds none. He refuses to flinch or glance away. Eventually, the lift whirs open, revealing a more secure floor, a place reserved for higher-level staff. The corridor is deserted. Harsh lighting accentuates every angle, every potential hiding spot. Doors line the walls, each with a coded lock. A sign in an alien script dangles overhead. He scans it. "Command Center," he reads. "That way." She darts ahead, silent and confident. He wonders if she's always been this fearless or if desperation fuels her. Through the glass window of a sealed room, racks of data servers blink with green and red LEDs. This has to be the place. He gestures for her to stay put, but she shakes her head, already moving to the door. He finds the security panel, attempts a bypass. She watches him with a raised eyebrow. It's a complicated mechanism, advanced beyond the typical door controls. His jaw sets. She exhales impatiently, and with a sudden step forward, she places her hand over his. Her claw extends again, slicing into a hidden maintenance port. Electricity crackles, and the door slides open. She smirks, tail swishing. "You're getting predictable," she says, slipping inside. "Try to keep up." He steps in after her, scanning the rows of humming servers. Data streaming across glowing screens, a testament to the monstrous network behind the trafficking ring. If he can pull the right files, he'll have names, locations, everything he needs to burn this operation down. But there's no doubt an alarm is about to trip. Facilities like this have failsafes. Any unauthorized access triggers lockdown protocols. Sure enough, red lights flood the room, accompanied by a blaring klaxon. Saphira winces, covering her sensitive ears. He hurries to a console, frantically accessing the root directory. She crouches by the entrance, scanning for threats. Her tail lashes in agitation, her acute hearing likely turning the siren into a personal torture device. Data scrolls across the screen. He inserts a portable drive, copying as much as he can. He glimpses lines of text referencing shipments, labs, and a coded mention that could be about her. His chest tightens. She's not the only one in danger. There are more like her, or at least there were. The file's name suggests a larger operation. Her breath hitches behind him. He glances over his shoulder. She's tense, the glowing bands of her eyes narrowing in rising anger. She must recognize something on the screens, some detail that's personal. Before he can ask, a volley of laser fire lights up the corridor outside. She ducks, hissing in frustration, then returns fire with a rifle she snatched from one of the guards earlier. "You done yet?" she shouts over the alarm. "Working on it." He clenches his teeth as the progress bar crawls forward. 70%, 80. The door behind them shudders as more guards rush in, their footsteps pounding. Saphira stands, blasts a burst of weapon fire. She doesn't flinch at the recoil, each shot methodical and lethal. He's never seen an alien move like her, every muscle taut, every motion seamless, as if the weapon is an extension of her body. 95%. 96. He checks the corridor, no time to finish them off. They're pinned. Sweat beads on his temple. The alarm screams. Saphira snarls under her breath, flaring with restless energy. He tears his gaze from her just as the drive beeps complete. He yanks it out, pockets it. "Now!" he barks, and they bolt for the side door. Shots ricochet behind them. She's already 2 steps ahead, prying open the exit. They sprint down a narrow hallway. The building's defenses slam into place, reinforced shutters descending from the ceiling. They slide past one a split second before it seals. She's breathing hard, adrenaline evident in her posture. He tries not to stare, tries to ignore how the rush of battle has his heart pounding in sync with the primal reaction of her presence. They weave through the facility's labyrinth, searching for an exit. Every corridor threatens more guards or locked gates. Their survival hinges on combined skill, though either will admit they need each other. Eventually, they find a loading bay. Shuttles and small vehicles line the docking stations, most locked down, but he spots one that might be in standby mode. She's already moving to the control panel, ignoring the smear of blood from a graze on her forearm. He steps forward to help, but she waves him off. Her claws tap the screen with a flurry of alien symbols. Then the shuttle hatch opens. Inside, she commands, voice still carrying that vibration that makes his pulse spike. He forces down a retort, checking behind them for pursuers. None yet, but it's only a matter of time. The hatch closes once they're in. A row of seats lines the compartment, with a cockpit up front. She slides into the pilot's seat, tail curling around her waist. He takes the co-pilot's station, scanning the unfamiliar controls. She powers it up, engines whirring to life in a dull roar. The docking bay roof splits open with a mechanized groan. As the shuttle lifts off, bright searchlights spear through the darkness. He grips the console. They'll try to lock onto us. She smirks. Then let's see how well they aim. The craft shoots upward, slipping through the gap in the roof. Energy beams slice through the night sky behind them. Safra banks hard, pressing him into his seat. The readouts show they're on the outskirts of a sprawling city, neon spires rising like luminous thorns. She navigates around towering structures, the shuttle weaving dangerously close to glass-paneled walls. He clenches his jaw, focusing on the radar. Sure enough, a squad of interceptors is closing in. She exhales sharply, flipping a switch. Hold on, she warns. The engines whine with sudden torque, and the shuttle lurches, accelerating into a steep dive between skyscrapers. Bright billboards and illuminated walkways blur past. The interceptors follow, their red-lanced weaponry scorching the air. Each near miss sets his nerves on edge. But Safra is eerily calm, as though she thrives on the risk. A grin flashes across her lips. She twists the controls, pulling off a corkscrew maneuver that leaves the pursuing ships overshooting. He finds himself both impressed and exasperated. This is insane. Yet it's also exhilarating. He's fought his way through countless hot zones, but never has he felt this surge of adrenaline mixing with something else, something electric that crackles every time he glances at her. She dips around a towering spire, then yanks the craft into a narrow alley that seems far too cramped. Sparks fly from the shuttle's hull as it scrapes the edges. Behind them, one of the interceptors tries to follow, and slams into a building with a fiery explosion. Outracing the others, she emerges into open air. Sirens still echo behind them, but with the help of the city's labyrinthine design, they shake off the final pursuers. He breathes out, a ragged sound. She's panting too, but her eyes flash with triumph. She sets the shuttle to autopilot for a moment, turning to him with a proud tilt of her head. Didn't expect a kitten to fly, did you? She challenges. He gives her a long look, smirk returning. You're full of surprises, he concedes. Then his expression hardens. That data we stole, any idea what's on it? She shrugs, but her gaze flickers, betraying that she recognized something. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. He exhales a curse, glancing at the swirling city lights beneath them. I need to drop this intel off with someone I trust. She cocks an eyebrow. Trust? You really think you can trust anyone? He doesn't answer. His mind drifts back to the sister he lost, the reason he ended up in this line of work. That memory carves a raw ache in his chest. He kills it with a shake of his head, refocusing on the moment. We find a safe place to land, then we talk. She leans back in the pilot's seat, tail draping over one thigh. Fine. But don't waste my time. They navigate the outskirts of the city until they reach a rundown industrial zone, rusted rooftops, flickering lights, and an atmosphere that suggests minimal law enforcement presence. They touch down on a deserted platform. Engines power down, leaving them in the hush of the nighttime smog. He secures the shuttle. She prowls around, scanning the perimeter. Once he's satisfied no immediate threat is present, he turns to face her. Silence stretches between them, charged with leftover adrenaline. She looks him up and down, assessing. He can almost hear her thoughts, whether to kill him, leave him, or keep him around. He wonders the same about her. They're both lethal, both untrusting, yet forced into this alliance by necessity. He breaks the silence first. Callum Voss, he says, offering his name at last. Figure we shouldn't stay strangers. She watches him, tail swishing. After a moment, she nods. Saphira, she replies, though she'd already told him. Somehow, hearing it again feels more official. He leans against the crate. You got a plan? Because I need to get this data to someone who'll actually do something with it. I'm no hostage, she reminds him, voice humming with the latent frequencies that make his nerves buzz. And I'm not your partner. He sets his jaw. We're both targets now. So unless you have a better idea, we move together. She narrows her eyes, considering. Then she huffs, conceding the point. I know a place. Out in the waste zones, far from the city patrols. We can lay low. He arches a brow. You're just going to lead me there? How do I know you won't ditch me halfway? She lets out a soft, taunting laugh. Why bother ditching you when I can leave your body behind if I feel like it? He doesn't doubt she could try. Yet something in her tone suggests she's testing him, seeing how he reacts to threats. He answers with a wry grin. Try it. Her pupils dilate, capturing the faint glow of neon from the city skyline. For a second, neither of them says anything. The tension builds, a subtle pressure in the air. Finally, she pivots, heading back into the shuttle's hold. Let's go, then. Unless you want to wait for the authorities to descend on this place. He follows, holstering his sidearm but keeping it unlatched for quick draw. She powers up the shuttle's engines once more. Their departure from the industrial zone is much smoother this time. No immediate chase. The city's lights fade behind them as they fly toward the darker outskirts where fewer flights roam. Below, abandoned buildings and crumbling infrastructure mark the frontier between civilized spires and lawless zones. They don't speak for a while. He sets the radar to passive scanning, occasionally checking for pursuit. She stares straight ahead, occasionally tapping a console or adjusting the flight path. Though no words are exchanged, the air remains thick with an unspoken challenge. He senses she's ready to lash out if he tries anything. She probably senses the same about him. Yet a flicker of warmth stirs in his chest, something dangerously close to admiration for the way she handles herself. Eventually, the shuttle crests a ridge of twisted metal remains, a scrap field of ancient starship parts. She brings them down in a clearing that looks marginally stable. Rusted beams jut from the ground, and the air tastes of chemical waste. He winces at the stench, stepping out onto the platform. She follows, scanning the horizon with ears twitching. There's a bunker about half a kilometer that way, she says, pointing with a clawed fingertip. It's hidden. No one should bother us. If you can handle the smell. He gives a quick nod. Lead on. They pick their way across the debris. Pools of neon liquid bubble in the crevices, the byproduct of old reactor cores. The entire region feels like a graveyard of technology. Occasional gusts of wind carry acidic dust that stings his eyes. She navigates the terrain with feline grace, barely making a sound. He's been through harsher environments, though, so he manages. They move quickly, alert for any sign of scavengers or lurking threats. Before long, they arrive at a half-buried hatch. She kneels, yanking at a metal ring. With a groan, the hatch lifts, revealing a ladder leading into darkness. One by one, they descend. Lights flicker on automatically, triggered by some motion sensor. The bunker is cramped, consisting of a single main chamber and a smaller side room. But it's dry, shielded, and evidently has power. She checks a control panel, then crosses her arms, watching him. This'll do. You can contact your people from here? He moves to an old console in the corner. It hums softly, its screen flickering with static. I'll try. Looks like a standard frequency array. I just need to see if the uplink is intact. He slots his portable drive into the console. The data begins to decrypt. She lingers behind him, silent. He senses her eyes on his back, that predatory evaluation, but he focuses on the loading screen. The files appear, rows of logs, coordinates, itemized lists referencing dozens of species, transaction records tied to shady black market organizations. It's worse than he thought. He finds a coded entry referencing an experiment run by an organization known only by an emblem, a stylized serpent coil. He's never seen the symbol before, but Saphira stiffens, a faint hiss escaping her lips at the sight of it. She draws closer. He can feel her heat at his side. You know them? He ventures. She doesn't answer, but the tension in her posture is palpable. Her claws flex, as if remembering something or someone. He sets his jaw. They're the ones who had you? She exhales sharply. Among others. They run things behind the scenes. You think this city's corruption is bad? They're bigger than the city, bigger than this planet. You have no idea. He scowls. All the more reason to bring them down. She scoffs, though the anger in her eyes betrays that she wants it too. Good luck. You saw how many guards they have at just one facility. He shrugs, and that trademark smirk flickers back. I've taken on worse. Right now, though, I just need to get these files to someone who can do something. She leans against the console, tail curling around the leg of a nearby chair. Who? He hesitates. An old contact, part of a group that's trying to break the rings from the inside. Her ears flatten slightly, suspicious. And you trust them? He turns to face her. She's too close, the flickering console lights casting shifting shadows that emphasize the sharp angles of her face. As much as I can trust anyone in this line of work. Anyway, you have a better idea? She doesn't answer that question. Instead, she traces a claw along the console's edge. You realize that if you hand these files over, they'll mark you, and me, for elimination. If they haven't already. He nods. They already have my name from the infiltration. And you're definitely on their radar. So that changes nothing. Her eyes narrow in reluctant agreement. Then she paces away, tension coiling in her posture. He forces himself to focus on the next steps. The console has a communications link, albeit weak. He keys in an encrypted frequency, hoping to reach his contact. Static. Then a faint voice. He intensifies the signal, ignoring the pang of worry in his chest. The entire time, he feels Saphira's gaze. She's like a cat waiting to see if the mouse bites the trap. Eventually, the link stabilizes. He keeps the conversation terse. Passcodes, quick identification, a plan to deliver the data. He cuts the connection, turning to see Saphira perched on the edge of a battered table, one leg drawn up, her chin resting on her knee. This contact of yours, she says in a low voice. Do they know about me? He shrugs. They will soon enough. But I won't mention specifics unless I have to. She exhales a slow breath. I'm not your bargaining chip. He straightens. You think I'd trade you for intel? She lifts her head, meeting his gaze. In that moment, the air crackles with unspoken tension. I've seen humans do worse. He steps closer, not out of intimidation, but because something about her provocation draws him in. You said it yourself? You're no pet. So don't expect me to treat you like one. Her ears flick, a subtle motion that betrays some internal reaction. She slides off the table, her steps nearly soundless on the bunker floor. Their eyes remain locked. He notices how her pupils widen slightly, reflecting the dim lights. She's close enough that he can catch the faint musk of her alien pheromones. Possibly unintentional, possibly not. Good, she murmurs. Because I don't belong in a cage. Silence envelopes them. The beep of the console, the faint hum of the bunker's generator, even the drip of condensation in some corner, everything fades under the intensity of their standoff. He hasn't even begun to process what exactly she means to him in this swirling chaos. She's a key witness, a target, a deadly fighter, and a puzzle he can't quite solve. If he let himself slip, he might admit there's a forbidden allure to her confident danger. But he can't let himself slip. She's an alien who could kill him in his sleep if she wanted. They share only a temporary alignment of goals. That's all. Still, his voice catches slightly when he says, "We've got a few hours before the meet. We should rest, keep an eye on the perimeter." She nods without argument, surprisingly. He checks the small side room. Inside is a cramped cot, a storage locker, and a rusted sink. She glances around as if unimpressed. "I've stayed in worse." He shrugs. "There's only one bed." She laughs softly, low in her throat. "Don't get any ideas. I'll sleep with one eye open." He smirks, stepping back into the main area. "Suit yourself?" Time passes in tense quiet. The occasional beep from the console indicates some system checks are still running. He wonders if the facility they escaped is scanning for their shuttle's drive signature. Probably. They'll need to ditch that shuttle eventually. For now, though, it's their only means of transportation. He slumps against the wall, arms crossed, fighting the exhaustion creeping into his limbs. Between the infiltration, the firefight, and the adrenaline crash, he's running on fumes. He notices Safra in the doorway, observing him. She leans casually against the frame, tail swaying, though there's a subtle tightness around her eyes that suggests she's tired too. She might not admit it, but no one is invincible. He returns her stare with a level gaze. She snorts softly, stepping forward. "You look half dead, human," she says, though her tone lacks its earlier edge. "A nap won't kill you." He tilts his head, hearing a note of concern that wasn't there before. Or maybe he's imagining it. "Never said it would." Without waiting for a reply, she crosses to one corner of the bunker where some old crates are stacked. She sinks down, leaning her head back against the wall. Her eyes shut, but her ears remain perked, betraying how alert she still is. He doesn't know if it's trust or exhaustion, but she's letting her guard down enough to rest in his presence. It's a silent message, a small sign they might not stab each other in the next few hours. He drags a stool over, dropping onto it with a grunt. The bunker's dim lights cast shifting shadows, and he finds himself watching the slow rise and fall of her chest as she breathes. Tired as he is, a flicker of warmth stirs in him at the memory of how she fought at his side, how seamlessly she read his movements in combat. Then he recalls the time she brushed past him, the subtle vibration of her voice. He steels himself. This is just a precarious alliance, not a chance for whatever it is his mind keeps conjuring. He closes his eyes, letting a half-doze take him. Minutes pass in muffled quiet, broken only by the distant rumble of the generator. Once or twice, he snaps awake at a faint sound, hand hovering over his sidearm. But there's nothing there, just old pipes rattling. Each time, he notices Safra's eyes open a sliver, also scanning for danger. The moment passes, and they drift into partial rest again, hearts never fully slow. Eventually, the console beeps with a new alert. He jolts upright, Safra's tail snapping to attention. He moves to the screen, reading the cryptic message from his contact, a location, a time, instructions to come alone. He scoffs. Typical. They don't trust him either. Which makes sense. He starts shutting down the console. She rises, stretching with a languid roll of her shoulders that draws his involuntary attention before he catches himself. "Time to go," he says. She nods once, no argument. Outside, the wasteland looms under a sky tinted with a faint haze. They climb into the shuttle again. This time, he insists on flying. She crosses her arms but allows it, sliding into the co-pilot's seat. He lifts off carefully, scanning for any signs of watchers. The area appears deserted. They head deeper into the outskirts, where civilization blurs into an endless sprawl of half-ruined industrial complexes. The coordinates lead them to a remote plateau where a cluster of old shipping containers form a makeshift compound. He can't help feeling the tension coil tighter with each second. If his contact betrays him, or if Saphira decides this is the moment to vanish, everything could go sideways fast. He lands in a clearing surrounded by tall rusting fences. The shuttle powers down with a hiss. Saphira is on her feet immediately. He reaches for his sidearm, checking the charge. "Let me handle the talking," he says. She lifts a brow. "I don't talk. I act." He exhales, stepping onto the dusty ground. A figure emerges from the shadows, lean, cloaked, face hidden behind tinted goggles. Another 3 or 4 armed individuals stand behind, their weapons pointed but not firing. The lead figure waves a hand in greeting, stepping forward. Callum recognizes the stance. This is Etris, a woman who once helped him infiltrate a black market ring off-world. She's no friend, but they share a mutual enemy. "Long time, Vas," Etris says. "Heard you stirred up trouble at the facility." Callum's eyes flick to the armed men. "Had to. I got something you'll want." "Do you?" Etris's gaze slides past him to Saphira. "Who's your friend?" Saphira tenses, and the atmosphere crackles. Callum holds out a small data chip. "Coordinates, shipping logs, a list of buyers. This is big. With it, you can shut down half their network on this planet." Etris steps closer, ignoring Saphira for the moment. She takes the chip, slots it into a handheld device. Her expression tightens as the data scrolls. "Damn. This is bigger than I thought." Saphira shifts, crossing her arms. She radiates distrust. One of Etris's men eyes her tail, fingers twitching near the trigger. Callum places himself slightly between them, an unconscious protective move that he can't fully explain. Etris notices and smirks. "You want payment in credits?" Etris asks. "Or something else?" "Information," Callum states. "Everything you have on the symbol with the serpent coil." "Who are they? Where can I find them?" Etris frowns. "That's a steep price. They're rumored to operate from the shadows of multiple worlds, powerful enough to topple governments if they choose." Saphira exhales sharply, a trace of anger. Etris notices, eyes narrowing. "You have a personal stake in this?" Saphira's pupils thin, her voice humming with subtle menace. "I have a score to settle." Etris glances between them, then nods. "I'll see what I can do." She transfers some data to a fresh chip, hands it over to Callum. "This is everything my network knows about them, which isn't much. But it's a start. You might be chasing ghosts." Callum pockets the chip, ignoring the sense of dread gnawing at him. "We'll manage." Etris waves a hand at her men, signaling them to stand down. "I'll handle distribution of the logs, coordinate with your friends so we can cut off those shipments. But watch your backs. The moment those bastards know you took their data, they'll come for you." With that, the meeting seems concluded. Etris steps away, her retinue following, their footfalls echoing on the metal deck. Saphira remains silent until they're back in the shuttle. Once seated, she turns to him, eyes dark. "So you got what you wanted," she says. He powers up the engines. "We both did. These logs help your people too, if you have any left." She doesn't confirm or deny. The shuttle rises off the ground. They angle away from the compound, heading into the sky. For a moment either speaks. The hum of the engines fills the silence. Then she asks, "What now?" He exhales. "We find them. The people behind that serpent coil. We rip this operation apart at the source." A flicker of approval crosses her face. "And if it kills us?" His smirk is cold. "Then we make sure we kill them first." She turns to stare out the viewport, her reflection shimmering in the glass. He senses a shift in her, a softening that's not exactly gentle, more like an acknowledgement that their goals align in a deeper way. Still, she doesn't lose her edge. "I'll hold you to that." They spend the next several hours flying away from the city's outskirts, deeper into unregulated territory. The data from Etris includes possible hideouts, supply routes, and known affiliates. It's a tangled web. Some leads might be dead ends, others lethal traps. But that's the path they choose to walk now. Eventually, They find another remote location to set down for a breather. A half-collapsed structure near a toxic river, reeking of chemicals. The sky overhead is a dull gray, swirling with smog. Perfect cover for a clandestine stop. He kills the engines, and they exit the shuttle, scanning for threats. It seems deserted enough. While he checks the perimeter, Saphira remains by the water's edge. Her ears move in subtle arcs, listening to the unnatural gurgling of the polluted stream. She crouches, trailing her fingertips just above the surface, not quite touching. He watches from a distance, noting the tension in her shoulders. Something about this place unsettles her. "Why'd you stop here?" she calls out, not looking at him. He moves closer, arms folded. "Needed a rest. The shuttle's running low on coolant. We can't risk a meltdown on the next jump. Besides, I had to see if any of these leads are close by." She glances up, her eyes reflecting the murky light. "You're relentless." He shrugs. "I've come too far to quit." She straightens, brushing off her hands. The tail flicks in an almost agitated manner. "Fine. Let's figure out where to strike first." They head back inside the half-collapsed building, navigating around piles of debris. Some sections of the roof have caved in, exposing rusted girders. They settle in what used to be a main lobby, the floor cracked but relatively stable. Callum spreads out a portable holomap, projecting the data points from the chip Etris provided. Saphira stands across from him, studying the swirling lines of territory and alliances. Occasionally, her claws trace over a point that resonates with her memory. "That's a supply route," she mutters, tapping a glowing line on the holomap. "I recognize the name of the transport. They used it to move." She cuts herself off, anger tightening her jaw. He nods, memory flicking to the logs in the data. "We can intercept. Might force them to reveal a larger base." She meets his gaze, tension in every line of her body. "Then we do it." He notices her knuckles turning white where she grips the edge of the map. He says nothing, but he senses her hatred for these traffickers runs deeper than she's letting on. Good. They share that hatred. A quiet moment passes, the hum of the projector their only soundtrack. The complexity of this operation is staggering. If they go at it alone, the odds are slim. But trusting others is risky. She shifts closer, scanning the lead. The proximity makes his heart thrum slightly faster. Her scent is subtle but distinct, the faint brush of her hair near his shoulder setting off an unwanted jolt of awareness. He forces his focus onto the plan. She's an ally in war, nothing more, he tells himself. Still, the tension between them is so thick he can almost taste it. They decide on a forward approach, locate the supply route's next checkpoint, ambush the convoy, extract information from any survivors. Brutal but effective. She demands to handle the ambush herself. She's faster, deadlier. He counters that he needs to be there to see the leads for himself. Their argument is heated, each pushing, either backing down. Eventually they reach a compromise. They attack together, but from different angles. By the time they settle the plan, night has deepened. Toxic clouds drift across the sky. He moves to check on the shuttle's coolant issue, leaving Saphira behind in the building to gather her energy. He wonders if she'll try to leave, but deep down, he suspects she won't. She has her own vendetta, and as much as she hates to admit it, having him around is useful. Outside, the gloom is nearly absolute. Only the distant flicker of lightning illuminates the jagged skyline. He pops open the shuttle's side panel, rummaging for spare parts. Finding what he needs, he gets to work, hands moving with the practice of someone who's done field repairs too many times to count. His mind drifts as he tightens a clamp, recalling the chaos back at the facility. Despite the mayhem, he can't ignore the memory of how his heartbeat quickened whenever she looked at him, or the sparks of heat when they fought back to back. It's more than just adrenaline. He doesn't want it to be, but it is. When he's nearly finished, he senses a presence behind him. He straightens, turning to see her standing at the edge of the dim light. She says nothing at first, just watches him. He tries not to let his eyes wander over her form, the way the faint glow highlights her lithe physique and those feline features that set her apart from anything he's known. "Is it fixable?" she asks quietly. He nods, sealing the last clamp. For now. Long flights might still be risky. She steps forward, arms folding. There's an uncharacteristic stillness to her. Usually, her tail is in constant motion, or her ears swivel at every noise. But now she seems oddly composed, as though building up to something. He waits, unsure what to expect. She lifts her gaze, meeting his eyes. I don't want your pity, she murmurs, voice low. But you need to know this fight is bigger than you realize. He wipes grease from his hands, glancing at her. I'm not naive. She exhales softly. I've seen entire planets forced to bend to the serpents. They manipulate, bribe, enslave. If we go after them, it might uncover more than either of us can handle alone. He studies her face, noticing the shadow of fear that crosses her features. You're telling me to back off? A faint smirk tugs at her lips, but there's no mirth in it. Never. He nods, leaning against the shuttle's hull. Then we keep going. One step at a time. She steps closer. He notices now how those slit-pupil eyes faintly reflect the ambient light, giving her a predatory allure that sets his nerves on edge in ways both threatening and something else. The space between them seems to crackle. She opens her mouth as if to say more, but then a distant rumble of thunder distracts them both. He points to the battered entrance of the building. We should get inside before the storm hits. She agrees with a curt nod, and they return to the meager shelter. The storm soon rages outside, acid rain hissing against metal debris, lightning casting skeletal shadows across the interior. Saphira crouches by a corner, scanning the darkness. He sits a few meters away, weapon within reach, though some instinct tells him she's more adept at close-quarters combat than he. The wind howls, the building groaning. Hours crawl by. The storm intensifies, turning the outer world into a tumult of shrieking wind and lashing acid droplets. Sleep seems impossible. Occasionally, he meets her gaze across the dim space. There's a shared tension in these glances. Either wants to be the first to let down their guard. Yet exhaustion gnaws at them. Eventually, he closes his eyes, just to rest them. The thunder becomes a distant rumble. He's not sure how much time passes, but a flash of lightning jolts him awake. He sees her silhouette across the room, in mid-step, as if pacing. She stops when she notices him stir. He exhales, running a hand through his hair. You always so restless? He mutters. She huffs softly. I don't sleep well. You! He makes a non-committal sound, leaning back against the cold wall. I've learned to sleep anywhere, but I don't like storms. They were never kind to us in the war zones. Her tail flicks. War zones. That explains your methods. He shrugs, not wanting to open that door. Memories of scorched earth, of the sister he failed to protect, swirl under the surface. Instead, he turns the conversation back to her. What about you? You said you've seen entire planets bow to these people. She hesitates, ears tilting back. I was traded from one ring to another. I learned to fight, to kill, because it was that or die. Eventually, I escaped. But no matter where I ran, I found their tentacles in everything. He nods grimly. Then you know how deep this goes. She crosses her arms, staring at the flicker of lightning. Hence why I don't trust easily. And why I don't plan on losing again. Something about the raw edge in her voice resonates with him. He respects that fight. They fall into a pensive silence. The building rattles under the storm's onslaught. Eventually, the howling wind fades, leaving only a steady hiss of rain. You should sleep, she says suddenly, her tone less combative. We'll need strength for the ambush. He regards her warily. What about you? I'll rest when I'm ready. There's no room for argument in her voice. He shifts into a more comfortable position, still keeping his sidearm near. He closes his eyes, letting exhaustion finally claim him, though he remains half-conscious of her presence. The last thing he sees before drifting off is her silhouette, a silent sentinel in the flickering gloom, tail swaying like a pendulum of coiled tension. When he wakes, the storm has passed. Pale light filters through a jagged hole in the roof. She's sitting near the opening, face turned upward as if savoring the faint glow. He yawns, stands, and rolls his shoulders to ease the stiffness. Outside, the debris field glistens with acidic puddles that reflect the pallid sky. She glances over when he approaches. "Sun's up. We should move," she says. He nods, checking his gear. "Ambush site is about 30 clicks from here, near a canyon. If they're running supplies, it'll be through that pass." She smirks. "Let's catch them with their guard down." They return to the shuttle. The flight is short, aided by the break in the weather. He lands on a mesa overlooking the canyon, setting the shuttle to low-power mode. A quick survey with binoculars shows a winding road carved through stone, perfect for a hidden transport route. He sees no sign of movement yet, but that doesn't mean the convoy isn't coming. They set up vantage points. She scrambles onto a rocky ledge, while he positions himself on the opposite side of the trail. They've agreed on signals, quick bursts on comms if the convoy appears. Then they'll strike from both sides. He can't see her from where he is, but he imagines her perched like a cat waiting to pounce, ears alert, tail curled around a rock for balance. Time drags, the sun climbing higher. Heat radiates from the stone, and he sips from his canteen. Then, around midday, a distant rumble echoes through the canyon. His heart quickens. Peering through the binoculars, he spots a line of 4 vehicles, heavily armored hover trucks, escorted by what appears to be a small security detail on bikes. He checks the comm. "They're here," he murmurs, receiving only static in return, her silent acknowledgement. He steadies himself, carefully taking aim with a scoped weapon. The plan is to disable the lead truck and trap the convoy. Saphira will flank from above, sowing chaos. No survivors unless they surrender valuable intel. He breathes slowly, focusing on the lead vehicle. A single shot from his rifle hits the engine block with a spurt of sparks. The truck lurches to a halt, listing dangerously. Alarms blare. The escort bikes scramble, scanning the cliffs for the shooter. Right on cue, Saphira drops down from her vantage point onto the trailing vehicle, claws rending metal with a shriek. Panicked shouts reach his ears. Shots fire from below. He picks off 2 guards, making sure not to hit Saphira, who's now leaping from one vehicle to another with impossible agility. Her tail whips around for balance as she uses the momentum to strike. The canyon is a cacophony of laser fire and shouted commands. He sees the second truck attempt to reverse, but she's already there, slashing its tires in a single fluid motion. He climbs down, using the rocky outcrops as cover. The guards, disoriented by Saphira's vicious assault, don't notice him until it's too late. He fires a few precise shots, each dropping a target. One guard tries to run, but Saphira lands in his path, eyes blazing. The guard stumbles back, terror evident on his face. "Wait, wait!" the guard pleads, dropping his weapon. She stands over him, claws ready. For a moment, Callum thinks she'll kill him outright, but she hesitates, glancing up at Callum. "We need information," he calls, sprinting to her side. The guard trembles, hands raised. Saphira curls her lip in a silent snarl, but holds off on the killing blow. "Talk," she demands, voice pulsing with that predatory edge. The guard babbles something about shipments, codes, and superiors. Callum leans in, pressing the barrel of his gun to the guard's temple. "Who runs the Serpent Coil? Where are they based?" I don't know," the guard stammers. "They don't tell us. We just transport cargo." "Please!" Callum grits his teeth. This lackey is worthless. Saphira's tail lashes. She's about to lose patience. He tries another angle. "What's in these trucks?" The guard's eyes dart nervously. "Experimental specimens, people, some gear." "I just drive, man!" Saphira's claws twitch, fury building. She hates hearing about living cargo. Callum can see it in her posture. He runs a quick scan of the lead truck, noting the locked containers inside. If there are living beings in there, they need to be freed. "Open it!" he orders the guard. The guard fumbles with his keycard, guiding them to the cargo hold. With a beep and a hiss, the doors slide open. Rows of cages line the interior. He swears under his breath. Inside are a handful of alien captives, terrified eyes peering through the bars. Saphra's face is stone, a single muscle twitch in her jaw betraying her rage. She steps into the truck, scanning the wretched faces. Callum pivots, grabbing the guard. Is this all of them? The guard nods frantically, tears of fear in his eyes. Yes. They don't keep many at once, I swear. Saphra exhales a trembling breath. She's seen this before, no doubt. Callum can sense her anger boiling, an anger he shares. Carefully, he starts unlocking cages. The aliens inside, various species, all malnourished and injured, stumble out, barely believing they're free. Saphra remains by the entrance, her fists clenched. She doesn't speak, but her gaze roams over the captives, a mixture of sympathy and fury glowing in her eyes. Once the last of them is out, she turns her attention back to the guard. He cowers, sputtering apologies. Callum grimaces, pushing him away. Run! He growls, voice dripping with contempt. The guard scrambles off, stumbling over the canyon rocks. Saphra's eyes narrow, but she doesn't pursue him. Instead, she turns to the freed captives, pointing toward the disabled escort bikes and trucks. Find anything useful. Take it. Then go. The group hesitates, uncertain. But as they realize neither Callum nor Saphra intends to harm them, they nod. A few rummage for supplies, others simply flee up the canyon path. One stumbles, and Saphra reaches out to steady him. He thanks her with watery relief. She averts her gaze, as though empathy embarrasses her. Callum sees it though. And in that moment, he understands a piece of her he hadn't before. We can't just leave them here, he says quietly, once the captives have scattered. Saphra exhales. If they stay near us, they'll be targets. Safer if they disappear, find local help. He nods, eyes lingering on the handful of battered vehicles. One of these might still run. We could send them toward a friendly outpost. But the choice is theirs. She shrugs, turning away. Her tail flicks. We've done what we can. He's about to reply when he hears a muffled cry. He spins, noticing one last cage at the rear of the truck, half hidden behind crates. Rushing over, he shines a light to reveal a small figure, a young alien child with wide, terrified eyes. He curses softly, beckoning to the child. It's okay. Come on out. The child shrinks back, unsure. Saphra steps beside Callum, voice dropping to a gentler register. You're safe now. We won't hurt you. Her tone thrums with that low vibration, but this time it's not menacing, it's soothing. Slowly, the child creeps forward, allowing Callum to lift him free. He's trembling, probably in shock. Callum's jaw sets. He can't leave a kid wandering the wasteland. He looks to Saphra. There's a flicker in her eyes, a quiet understanding. They share the same unspoken thought. The child can't survive alone out there, not in this state. We'll take him, Callum decides firmly. At least until we find a safe place. She nods, surprisingly without protest. Her ears flick sympathetically, and she places a comforting hand on the child's shoulder. The child gazes up at her with a mixture of awe and fear, clearly never having seen someone like her, part feline and fiercely strong. But there's a kindness in her posture that wasn't there before. The child seems to sense it, pressing closer to her side for protection. I know someone, maybe, who can care for him, Callum says, though his connections are limited. We'll figure it out. They usher the child out of the truck. Saphra scans the surroundings, ensuring no more guards lurk nearby. The vehicles are mostly wrecked, except for one battered hoverbike. She glances at him. You handle the bike. I'll keep the kids safe. He hoists the child onto the front of the hoverbike, letting Saphra stand behind to stabilize him. Callum fiddles with the controls, managing to coax the sputtering engine to life. They leave the ruined convoy behind, the child clinging to the handlebars. Saphra rides pillion, tail coiled around her waist for balance, one hand protectively resting on the child's shoulder. Despite the bleakness of the situation, there's a spark of something that wasn't there before, a shared sense of purpose beyond vengeance. They speed through the canyon, finding a path that leads to a safer region. Eventually, they come across a small trading post, ramshackle huts, a few vendors, and a modest medical outpost. Callum stops the bike at the edge, motioning for Safra to stay with the child. He approaches an old vendor, quickly negotiating a place for the boy to stay. It costs him nearly all the credits he has on hand, plus a promise of future favors. But he doesn't hesitate. This is one part of the nightmare he can correct. When he returns, Safra stands beside the bike, the child clutching her hand. She kneels to speak softly to the kid, then gently encourages him to follow the vendor who waits nearby. The child hesitates, giving her a final, small hug. The contact visibly startles her. She stiffens, then slowly relaxes, resting a careful hand on the kid's back. Her eyes flicker with an emotion Callum hasn't seen from her before. Once the child is led away, Safra straightens, tail flicking in agitation or perhaps residual emotion. Callum stands nearby, silent. He wonders if she lost someone once, a younger sibling, a friend, to these traffickers. She doesn't volunteer the information, and he doesn't ask. He indicates the rest of the post. We could refuel, maybe find some supplies. She nods, walking with him through the dusty lanes of the trading post. The few inhabitants stare at her openly, some with curiosity, others with wariness. She ignores them, posture rigid, ears alert. He buys a few basics, ammo, rations, and a jerrycan of fuel. She hovers close, scanning for threats as if expecting an ambush at any moment. Once they're stocked, they return to the bike. The sky overhead darkens again with the onset of evening. She glances at him. Where to now? He checks a handheld device. We have another lead. A smaller lab facility on the outskirts of the main city. They might have direct ties to the Serpent Coil. If we hit them, we could find something concrete. She gives a grim nod. Then that's where we go. They ride out, the bike's engine whining under the added weight. The air grows cooler as night sets in. Callum tries to focus on the objective, but Safra's presence behind him is an ever-present awareness. Her arms are near his, her body heat radiating. It's both unsettling and compelling. He reminds himself to keep his guard up. But he can't deny the swirl of conflicting emotions that churn in his gut whenever she's this close. They cover a few miles before the bike starts sputtering. He curses under his breath. A quick inspection shows damage to the engine that can't be patched with the limited tools they have. Annoyed, they push the bike under an overhang of rock for a semblance of shelter, then abandon it. The facility is still a few kilometers away. Walking is their only option now. Trudging through the rocky terrain in near darkness, they keep a wary lookout. Safra's senses help. Her ears flick at every distant noise, her nose wrinkling at the stale smell of the desert. He relies on a small flashlight, the beam dancing over jagged stones and patches of scrub. Hours pass, fatigue setting in. Finally, they crest a ridge overlooking a valley dotted with flickering lights. That must be it, he says, voice hushed. She nods, eyes narrowing as she scans the distant compound. Just then, a faint rumble echoes across the valley. They see a patrol vehicle circling the perimeter, sweeping the area with floodlights. Security's tight, she observes. He smirks. Good. Means we're in the right place. They descend carefully, using the cover of darkness. By the time they reach the perimeter fence, it's well into the night. They hunker down behind a cluster of rocks, studying the patrol patterns. Safra shifts closer to him, her breath warm against his ear as she points out a gap in the route. He can smell the faint trace of her alien scent, a mix of something wild and vaguely floral, combined with the lingering ozone from the energy blasts earlier. All right, he murmurs. You take the east side. I'll circle around to the west. Meet near the main building. If things go south, we regroup at that rocky outcrop. She nods. Don't slow me down. He stifles a grin. Likewise. They split up, each moving with lethal stealth. He leaps over the fence when the patrol passes, rolling to muffle his landing. Quickly, he finds cover behind a supply crate. Checking for guards, he sees none, so he proceeds forward. The compound is bigger up close, multiple structures connected by lit walkways. The main building stands at the center. That's their target. He creeps along the shadows, disabling a security camera with a quick shot from a silenced pistol. Then he ducks into a side corridor. Footsteps approach. He flattens himself against the wall, letting two guards pass, their casual banter indicating they're not expecting trouble. Once they're gone, he moves on. A sudden commotion draws his attention, a flash of movement across the courtyard. He glimpses Saphira, mid-strike, taking down a guard in a blur of claws and silent ferocity. Before the body hits the ground, she's gone. He wonders if she's always fought like this, or if it's adrenaline from her personal vendetta fueling her. Either way, he's glad she's on his side. He reaches a door labeled Research Wing. It's locked, of course. He sets to work on the panel, quietly hacking the encryption. The door slides open with a soft hiss. Inside, corridors stretch in sterile white, reminiscent of the facility they left behind. Anxiety knots his gut. Memories of caged beings, inhuman experiments, swirl in his mind. He creeps down the hallway, past glass observation rooms. One is lit, revealing an operating table with ominous restraints. He clenches his teeth. So this is where they do it, where they dissect living creatures to further their twisted agenda. He's about to move on when a voice behind him makes his blood run cold. Halt! Don't move! A guard barks. He spins, but the guard already has a weapon trained on him. The guard's finger tightens on the trigger. Then, before a shot can fire, the man is yanked backward into the shadows. A soft cry escapes him, followed by a heavy thud. Saphira emerges into the dim light, brushing her hands together. You're welcome, she says, tail flicking behind her. He exhales a breath he didn't realize he was holding. You have a knack for timing, he mutters. She steps over the unconscious guard, eyes flicking to the operating room. So do they keep the files in there? He shakes his head. Maybe the main lab or the control room. Let's keep going. They press deeper, footsteps echoing on polished floors. Occasionally, red indicators on the walls mark restricted access. They follow them, suspecting the most secure areas hold the darkest secrets. Sure enough, they find a double-locked door with biometric scanners. Saphira tries her usual trick, slashing at the panel, but an alarm starts to wail. Lights shift to emergency red. Damn, she mutters. We have to move fast, he warns. He fires at the door's servo. Sparks fly. She kicks the heavy metal barrier, bracing all her strength. It shudders but doesn't give. Another shot. Finally it buckles, and they force it open just enough to slip inside. The alarm continues to shriek, echoing in the cramped corridor beyond. They stumble into a large chamber filled with server racks and holographic displays. The smell of ozone is strong, machines humming. White-coated scientists scramble, some running, others cowering. Guards rush in, weapons raised. Saphira launches at them with a furious snarl. Callum dives behind a console, returning fire. The exchange is short, savage. He knocks one guard out cold, while Saphira dispatches two more. A scientist attempts to crawl away, but Callum blocks his path. Shut down the alarm! Callum demands, weapon leveled. The scientist trembles, frantically tapping at a console. The siren abruptly cuts off, leaving a ringing hush. Saphira stands, chest heaving, scanning the room for any more threats. Finding none, she shoves the final guard aside. Callum points his pistol at the scientist. Where are the servers for the serpent coil? They have to keep records. The scientist stammers, pointing to a terminal at the far end. Saphira strides over, ignoring the trembling man. She taps the screen, navigating a labyrinth of files. Callum keeps watch, adrenaline spiking with each passing second. The building is definitely on alert, and more security might flood in at any moment. Saphira mutters curses under her breath. They have partial encryption. I can't crack it all. Callum glances around, spotting a more secure console near the center of the room. Try that station. It might be a mainframe node. She rushes over, swiftly plugging in a data spike from her belt. He stands guard, aware that every second is borrowed time. The scientist looks on, terrified, as lines of code scroll across the terminal's display. Finally, Saphira's tail lashes with excitement. I got something. Maps, infiltration points, research notes on alien genetic modifications. They're calling it Project Helix. Her voice tightens. They're engineering species for specific tasks. Slaves, soldiers, whatever they want. He feels bile rise in his throat. Download it all. She does so, expression dark. We should burn this place down. He doesn't disagree, but there's a chance more captive aliens might be held here. We need to check for prisoners. She nods curtly. They sweep through adjacent labs, forcing any remaining scientists to release the locked cages. This time, they find fewer prisoners, just a handful. But each one is traumatized, some too weak to stand. Saphira rips open a cabinet, pulling out med supplies. She hands them to Callum, who does his best to tend to those who can walk. They direct them to the exit, telling them how to slip past the disarmed security. As the last captive staggers out, Saphira glances at the flickering overhead lights. Her fury is tangible. Set the charges. He nods, planting small explosives on the critical consoles. They hurry back the way they came, stepping over the bodies of unconscious guards. The place has become a ghost town, scientists fleeing in droves, the alarm still muted but lights flashing in a frantic strobe. Once they're out of the building, he hits the detonator. A muffled roar shakes the foundation, flames licking at the rooftop. The night sky is illuminated by a plume of sparks. Saphira stands at his side, watching the destruction with grim satisfaction. For a moment, it feels like a victory. But the files she carries on the data spike weigh heavily on them both. This is just one lab, one piece of a vast, tangled operation. She exhales, tossing her green hair from her face. Her ears twitch, listening for any further signs of pursuit. None yet. The shadows around them dance with the glow of the burning lab. He steps closer, scanning her expression. She looks both triumphant and haunted. We did good, he says softly. She gives a slight nod, her eyes flicking to the horizon. Distant sirens echo, probably emergency services. They need to vanish before reinforcements arrive. They retrace their steps, heading toward a vantage point where they can reorient. She glances at him, eyes reflecting the glow of burning embers. We got intel. That was the point. And we freed a few more. He nods. It's not enough. She exhales. It never is. But it's a start. He can see the faint tremor in her hands as adrenaline ebbs. Without thinking, he reaches out to steady her. She flinches, a reflex of distrust, but then allows his hand to remain. The moment is electric, the closeness emphasizing the pounding in his chest. He opens his mouth, unsure what he's about to say, but the heat in her gaze momentarily eclipses words. A sudden crash behind them snaps them out of it. Part of the building caves in, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. They let go of each other, all business again. She brushes past him, posture taut. He feels the loss of her warmth, tries not to dwell on it. They find a small side road leading away from the compound, trudging in tense silence until the roaring flames are just a dim glow in the distance. Eventually, they discover an abandoned industrial shed, half collapsed but still offering some shelter. Exhaustion clings to them like a heavy cloak. He sets down his gear, scanning the perimeter to ensure they aren't followed. She paces the interior, tail flicking irritably. Though they're both tired, the adrenaline still surges. When he finally removes his sidearm and sets it aside, she watches him, ears tilted in a mixture of caution and curiosity. He tries to find something to say, but words fail him. The memory of the captives, the labs, the stench of fear, it weighs on him. She seems equally burdened. Their gazes lock, a mutual understanding of the horrors they've witnessed and the unstoppable drive that keeps them fighting. She steps closer, a challenge in her stance, as if daring him to address what's simmering beneath the surface. The tension they've tried to ignore flares up, magnified by the violence and desperation they've shared. She's the first to speak. "Why don't you hate me?" He blinks, caught off guard. "Hate you? For what?" She gestures to her feline features, the ears, the tail. "Your people would see me as a threat or an experiment. I'm the reason the serpent coil invests so much in biological manipulation. My species is part of their prized assets." He narrows his eyes. "I hate what they do, not you. You're a victim in this as much as anyone else. But you fought back, and now you're more than that." A pause, the air crackling. "Unless you give me a reason to hate you, I won't." She stares at him, expression unreadable. Then, with a scoff, she steps back. "Don't get sentimental." But there's no real bite to her words. He senses her conflict, the push and pull of wanting to remain distant but also craving understanding. He shakes his head, rummaging through his pack for a small canteen of water. He hands it to her. She accepts after a brief hesitation. The simple act of sharing water feels intimate in the hush of the battered shed. She takes a swig, wipes her mouth with the back of her hand, then returns it. Their fingers brush. The moment lingers, breath held. "We should rest," he says, forcing a practical tone. "Then decide our next move." She nods, placing the canteen aside. "I'll keep first watch." He starts to protest. She's just as exhausted, but the look she gives him silences any argument. He lowers himself to the ground, leaning against a rusted support beam. He can't relax, not fully, but the sense of security in her watchful presence allows him to close his eyes for a while. Later, he stirs to find her crouched at the entrance, the dawn light just beginning to filter through twisted metal. He rubs his eyes, stands. She looks his way, tail swishing. She seems to hesitate before speaking. "You were moving in your sleep," she says. "Nightmares?" He stiffens. "Yeah. Nothing new." Her gaze lingers on him, searching. Then she turns away without pressing further. He appreciates her restraint. He rolls his shoulders, checks his gear, and signals her to rest. She shakes her head. "I'll sleep later." Silently, they leave the shed, minding each step on the broken terrain. Over the next few days, they follow the leads from the data spike. Each location reveals another layer of the serpent coil's influence. Front businesses, smaller labs, hush-hush deals with corrupt officials. They destroy what they can, free whoever they find, but they also sense the net tightening. They're leaving a trail of fire and bodies, and eventually, the serpent coil will strike back in force. In one battered outpost, they learn of a rumored fortress, a hidden complex where high-ranking members oversee advanced research. The mention of it sends a shiver through Saphira. She refuses to elaborate, only insisting that if they can reach that fortress, they might cut off the head of the snake. Callum is all for it. Enough raids on the smaller operations. Time to hit the source. But he notices a strain in her eyes, an unspoken dread. They travel by stolen vehicles, by foot, sometimes bribing or threatening their way through checkpoints. Each time, they're forced into uncomfortable proximity, sharing tight spaces, relying on each other's reflexes. That tension grows, a palpable undercurrent that neither can fully ignore. They snap at each other over trivial things, each quick to anger, only to subside into a weighted silence. Yet they can't keep their eyes off each other, can't deny the magnetism that's built from shared danger. Finally, they track down a lead that points them to the desert plains beyond the city's protective dome. The fortress, according to rumors, is buried in the sands, a subterranean stronghold. They set out at dusk, using the cooler temperatures to their advantage. The terrain is harsh, all swirling dust and rocky outcroppings. Their stolen vehicle bounces over ridges, each jolt rattling their teeth. Saphira clings to the side, tail braced for balance. He glances over, momentarily distracted by the way her hair whips in the wind. She notices his stare, lips parting in a silent challenge. He quickly fixes his gaze on the horizon, heat creeping up his neck. This has to stop, he tells himself. They're going into a war zone, no time for whatever this is. They crest a dune and stop, engines idling. He scans the horizon with binoculars. There's nothing but endless desert. She takes out a small device, some kind of alien sensor, and waves it around. A faint beep triggers. She nods in satisfaction. "It's here," she mutters, pointing to a swath of seemingly empty sand. He kills the engine, stepping out onto the shifting dunes. Nightfall is complete, stars glimmering overhead. Together they approach, each step carefully placed. A few minutes later they spot it, a faint glimmer in the sand, a metallic hatch half buried. He crouches, brushing away dust. It's a sealed entryway, marked with a stylized serpent coil. They exchange a glance. This is it. He tries the hatch. It's locked. She kneels beside him, ear flicking as she listens to the mechanism. With a precise motion, she slices through the panel. The lock clicks. He wrenches the hatch open, peering into a dark shaft descending into the earth. A metal ladder leads down. "No telling what's inside," he says quietly. She offers a fierce grin. "All the more fun." He goes first, climbing into the darkness. The ladder creaks, a chill seeping from below. She follows, the hatch closing overhead, sealing them in near total blackness except for the faint glow of her eyes. He switches on a small flashlight, illuminating a tunnel that stretches ahead, walls lined with cables and vents. The air smells recycled, stale, but definitely in use. They proceed in a crouch, mindful of each step. The tunnel widens, leading to a more sophisticated corridor. Here, overhead lights hum with power. He senses an ominous hush. Usually, a place like this would be swarming with guards, but they encounter none yet. That can't be good. "Trap?" he whispers. She nods, tension coiled in every muscle. They move forward anyway. If the serpent coil truly controls this place, it's the only way to face them. Eventually, they reach a large door. It slides open automatically, revealing a massive chamber. Rows of terminals, advanced machinery, and a raised dais at the center. The walls are adorned with the serpent coil emblem. This is no mere lab, it's a command center. A lone figure stands on the dais, draped in a flowing black robe. The hood is lowered, revealing a humanoid face with unsettlingly dark eyes. The figure lifts a hand in a gesture of mock welcome. "We've been expecting you." Saphira bristles, claws unsheathing. Callum aims his weapon, scanning for hidden threats. The robed figure smiles, a cold, sinister expression. Behind them, metallic doors slide open, revealing armed guards and mechanical drones flanking the perimeter. A ring of opposition, slowly closing in. "I must commend your tenacity," the robed figure says, voice echoing through the chamber. "Though you caused a great deal of damage to our outposts, you led us to refine our security protocols. And here you are, delivering yourselves." He feels Saphira tense beside him, a low growl rumbling in her throat. "You'll pay for what you've done to my kind," she spits. The figure tilts their head, black eyes glittering with mirth. "Oh, my dear. We have done so much more than you realize. You are but one success among many. A weapon, honed to perfection." She lunges, but Callum grabs her arm, stopping her from charging into a hail of gunfire. The robed figure laughs softly. "Such spirit! But you won't get far." They raise a hand. "Seize them." In a heartbeat, the guards open fire. Callum drags Saphira behind a console, returning shots with deadly precision. Sparks shower from overhead lights. Drones buzz, unleashing lasers that carve scorch marks into the floor. Saphira snarls, vaulting over the console to pounce on a nearby guard, raking him with claws. The robed figure remains on the dais, observing with eerie calm. Chaos engulfs the chamber. Callum dives behind a pillar as bullets and energy beams shred the air. Saphira leaps from vantage to vantage, each slash or kick taking down a guard. But more keep coming, bolstered by the drones. He blasts 2 drones with well-placed shots, then ducks a lethal volley from a third. They're outnumbered, pinned by the ring of armed adversaries. The robed figure steps forward leisurely, as if strolling through a garden. They press a button on their wrist. Electricity crackles through the floor, arcs dancing across the metallic panels. Saphira cries out as a surge of current jolts through her. Callum feels his muscles seize, dropping him to a knee. He grits his teeth, trying to fight the convulsions. The guards close in, weapons aimed. You think you can destroy us? The figure intones, voice dripping with arrogance. We are evolution itself, forging new futures for the galaxy. Callum struggles to speak, forcing words through clenched jaws. You're nothing but parasites, feeding off suffering. He tries to lift his gun, but the electricity coursing through the floor makes it nearly impossible to move. Saphira trembles on all fours, her tail thrashing in agony. Her feline eyes burn with hatred. She growls, fighting to stand, and for a moment, it seems impossible. Then, with a snarl that tears from her throat, she forces her body upright. The robed figure's eyes widen fractionally, as though startled by her sheer will. She leaps toward them, ignoring the electricity dancing across her limbs. A guard intercepts her with a stun baton. She twists, shrieking as the baton connects with her ribs. But she continues forward, ramming her claws into the guard's throat. He collapses, gurgling. Another guard tries to grab her from behind. She whips around, tail sweeping his legs out from under him. In that split second, the robed figure steps back, pressing another control. A hidden turret descends from the ceiling, laser sights locking onto Saphira. Callum sees it lining up a shot. Summoning every ounce of strength, he lunges to his feet, ignoring the pain of electricity. With one desperate pull, he fires at the turret. It explodes in a shower of sparks. Saphira whirls, battered but alive. She meets his gaze, an unspoken gratitude shining briefly. Then they both turn toward the robed figure, who stands on the dais, expression dark. You think you've won? The figure hisses. You have no idea how deep our influence runs. Saphira lunges again, this time unstoppable. Her claws rake across the figure's arm. They recoil, blood spattering. Callum's shot blasts the control panel on the dais, silencing the electric current that's coursing through the floor. The figure staggers, eyes blazing with fury. Insolent creatures! Suddenly, an explosion rocks the chamber. One of the drones, damaged and sparking, collides with a console. Fire erupts. The robed figure seizes the moment, pressing a final switch. The dais lowers, carrying them into a hidden escape route. Callum rushes to stop it, but the mechanism seals them off. Damn it! He curses, pounding the dais platform. Saphira breathes heavily, blood trickling from a wound on her shoulder. Guards lie all around, some dead, others unconscious. Alarms blare again as the chamber fills with smoke. The flames begin to spread, devouring machinery and sending sparks raining down. They can't stay here. He grabs her arm gently. We have to go. She nods, pained but determined. They limp toward a side corridor, avoiding the worst of the fire. The complex is a maze, but Saphira's heightened senses guide them toward fresher air. They pass labs and bunk rooms, all deserted in the chaos. Finally, they find a maintenance tunnel that leads upward. Clambering up the metal rungs, they push open a hatch. Moonlight spills in. They emerge onto the desert surface, sand swirling in the night wind. They collapse onto the sand, gulping fresh air. Below them, muffled explosions hint that the fortress is tearing itself apart. He rolls onto his back, eyes fixed on the starry sky. Saphira flops beside him, tail limp. Her breathing is ragged, her body trembling from exertion and the lingering effects of electric shock. Didn't get the ringleader. She mutters bitterly, voice raw. He shakes his head. But we hit them hard. We have some of their data. They can't hide forever. She manages a faint smile, though it looks more like a grimace. You're relentless. He chuckles, then groans at the pain lancing through his ribs. So are you. They lie there, side by side, gazing at the stars. The desert wind brushes over them. Slowly, the reality of their situation sinks in. They're both wounded, exhausted, with no immediate transport. Yet they're alive, and they struck a major blow. The serpent coil will feel this. Callum turns his head to look at her, meeting those luminescent feline eyes in the moonlight. She looks back, and for once, there's no taunt, no guarded hostility. Just shared relief and something like respect. Her tail shifts, curling lightly across his ankle in an accidental brush. She seems to notice but doesn't pull away. He can't deny the pull he feels, the raw magnetism that's grown between them through every battle, every risk, every small sign of trust. He wonders if it's mutual, or if it's just him. But the way she's watching him right now suggests he's not alone in this. Look, he says quietly, not sure how to phrase what he wants to say. I know this is war, and we're. She cuts him off by lifting a finger to his lips. A gentle gesture, unexpected from her. Her eyes flick down, her ears lowering slightly. Then she leans in, pressing her forehead against his in a gesture both tender and fierce. His heartbeat thunders. He can feel her breath, can smell the faint musk of her skin under the desert wind. They remain like that for a moment, suspended between caution and longing. Then she pulls back just enough to speak, voice low, husky. You saved my life. More than once. He exhales a shaky breath. And you've saved mine. More than once. Her lips twitch, almost a smile. The tension in the air is thick, their faces inches apart. Don't think that means I owe you. A spark of challenge remains in her eyes, but it's softened by something deeper. He lifts a hand, letting it rest lightly on her cheek. I don't want a debt. I just. This time, she closes the distance before he can finish. The kiss is fierce, unyielding, a clash of wills and pent-up desire. Pain lances through his bruised ribs, but he doesn't care. He responds with equal intensity, a low groan escaping him as her claws dig gently into his shoulders. The heat of her body against his in the cold desert night triggers a surge of conflicting sensations: relief, triumph, raw hunger, and a sense of inevitability. When they break apart, they're both breathing hard. She exhales, tremors running through her. He tries to say something, but she silences him with another kiss, this one less frantic, more searching. It feels like they're battling for control even in this moment, each refusing to yield but also unwilling to part. Finally, necessity breaks them apart again as they gasp for breath. She rests her forehead against his, eyes closed. Damn it, she murmurs. Why do you make me feel this way? He brushes back a strand of her neon hair. I could ask you the same thing. They lie there, side by side, bodies pressed together in the sand, hearts pounding. The desert wind carries away the scent of smoke from the destroyed fortress. For a fragile second, it's just them, no war, no vendetta, just two survivors lost in a moment of raw connection. Eventually, she pulls away slightly, as if embarrassed by the depth of her reaction. Her tail flicks, stirring sand. He reaches for her hand, but she stands, wincing at the pain in her side. He sits up, ignoring his own aches. We need to find shelter, she says, voice still husky. I don't fancy freezing out here. He nods, standing unsteadily. They help each other stay upright, each offering a shoulder when the other stumbles. It's an awkward dance of dependence they never wanted, yet can't deny. As they trudge across the dunes in search of some refuge, they remain silent, but the tension between them has changed. It's no longer just hostility and suspicion. It's layered now with something deeper, more dangerous, the beginnings of genuine affection. They find a small hollow in the leeward side of a large dune. It offers minimal protection from the cold night wind. They collapse there, each leaning against the other for warmth. Her body is lithe, trembling slightly from pain. He wraps an arm around her, uncertain if she'll reject the gesture. Instead, she allows it, resting her head on his shoulder with a tired sigh. Night stretches on. Despite the discomfort, they drift in and out of light sleep, clinging to each other for heat. At one point she stirs, shifting to wrap her tail around his leg. He glances down at the luminous stripes in her hair, the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Something fierce wells in him, a protectiveness he hasn't felt since losing his sister. He vows silently not to let the serpent coil tear anything else from him. In the morning they continue onward, battered bodies protesting every step. Eventually they stumble upon a smuggler's track that leads them to a small settlement near an oasis. There, they trade a stolen day to drive for a rundown speeder bike. It's enough to get them back to the city. Each mile feels like a test of endurance. Once they reach the city's outskirts, they find a safe house rumored to be off the grid. A friend of a friend, or perhaps an old ally, left it behind. It's little more than a cramped apartment above a deserted storefront, but it has running water and basic medical supplies. They settle in, silently agreeing they need time to recover. She cleans and bandages her shoulder, wincing. He tends to his bruised ribs, cursing under his breath at every twinge. In the small confines of the safe house, their closeness is unavoidable. Tension builds anew. This time, it's not just the tension of partnership, but a heated awareness that flares whenever they brush against each other in the cramped living space. At times, frustration surfaces. They snap at each other over trivial things, only to realize it's more about unacknowledged attraction than real anger. When nighttime falls, they lie on thin mattresses on opposite sides of the room. The hush is palpable. He stares at the ceiling, remembering the way she kissed him, the taste of her rage and desire. Across the room, she's silent, but he senses she's just as awake. Finally, after what seems like hours, she speaks. "I can hear your heartbeat," she murmurs, voice cutting through the darkness. He hesitates. "That a skill of your kind?" She doesn't answer directly. "It's racing." He exhales, turning onto his side to face her, though the room is too dark to see more than her silhouette. "Wonder why?" She's quiet a moment, then she stands, crossing the small space in a few soft steps. He sits up as she kneels beside him, tail flicking. In the faint glow from a cracked window, he can see her eyes glinting. She places a hand on his chest, feeling his pulse. He doesn't move away. "This is stupid," she whispers, her voice trembling with an emotion she refuses to name. He catches her hand, holding it there. "We're fighting a war that might kill us tomorrow," he says softly. "Maybe stupid's all we have left." She leans in, and he meets her halfway. The kiss is slower this time, tinged with urgency but laced with something gentler. It doesn't feel like defeat or surrender. It feels like finding a tiny island of solace in a roiling sea of danger. They break apart, foreheads touching, breaths mingling. He shifts, making space for her beside him on the narrow mattress. She hesitates, pride and caution warring in her eyes. Then, with a whispered oath, she relents, lying beside him, her tail curling protectively over his leg. They share warmth under a thin blanket, the night's hush broken only by their quiet breathing. Whatever walls she built seem to crumble in the darkness. She buries her face against his neck, breathing him in. He wraps an arm around her, mindful of her injuries, letting his fingers trace soft circles on her back. Time loses meaning as they hold each other, a tangle of bruised bodies and battered hearts seeking a moment's reprieve. When dawn comes, they rouse with stiff limbs and cautious smiles. Neither speaks of regrets. Instead, they exchange a look of understanding. The war isn't over, not by a long shot. But they face it together now, bound by a bond forged in blood and tempered by an undeniable pull. Their next steps involve following the data they extracted from the fortress. Names, off-world coordinates, possible meeting places where the robed leaders might regroup. They realize they must leave this city behind, possibly this planet. The Serpent Coil's influence stretches across star systems. It won't end here. She's ready to chase them to the ends of the galaxy if necessary. He's determined to help her finish what they started. They load up supplies, steal a small vessel from a spaceport under cover of night. She snorts in amusement as he bypasses the docking clamp, remarking that for a human, he's not bad at infiltration. He retorts that for a catgirl, she's not bad at showing some trust. They share a smirk, ignoring the flicker of heat that passes between them. Once the ship's engines hum to life, they power up the thrusters, launching into the planet's upper atmosphere. Clouds swirl below as they break through, stars welcoming them above. It's a new horizon, a new battleground. She sets a course for a remote sector, guided by the coordinates they've pieced together from data chips. He runs a final diagnostic, then joins her at the helm. She glances at him. "We'll find them." He nods, resting a hand on the back of her seat. "And we'll end this." She shifts her gaze forward, cat-like eyes reflecting the starlight. They won't know what hit them. He slides into the co-pilot's seat, their shoulders brushing. The moment is quiet, charged. No more words need to be said. They're partners, more than partners. The jump drive spools up, a crescendo of energy. He places a hand over hers on the controls, and she lets him. Light warps around them, stars stretching into lines as they jump. Together, they hurtle into the unknown, prepared to face whatever the serpent coil hurls at them. Their war is far from over, but for now, they share a unity that makes victory seem not just possible, but inevitable. And whatever they are to each other, foes turned allies, lovers under fire, or two lost souls forging a connection in the heart of chaos, they'll see this through to the end. When the ship completes its first jump, the swirl of hyperspace collapses, and a new star system greets them. He checks the scanners, eyes flicking over readings. She leans forward, scanning the darkness with a predator's alertness. No sign of enemies yet, but both know it won't stay quiet for long. He glances at her, remembering how they met in that sterile corridor, how she taunted him, how he smirked at the idea of trouble. A faint smile ghosts his lips. She catches his gaze, arching a brow. What? Nothing, he replies, suppressing a full grin. Just thinking about how I was supposed to pick up a cute kitten that day. She chuckles, a rare sound that lights her eyes. Regrets? Not one, he says softly, and for a moment, they share a genuine, unguarded smile. The subtle beep of the ship's console interrupts, indicating a navigational fix. She taps the controls, pointing them toward the next coordinate. He settles into his seat, adrenaline sparking at the thought of the next battle. She angles the ship toward the distant glow of a nameless star. Whatever awaits them, they'll meet it together. They slip into the darkness between worlds, side by side, each with scars that will never fully heal but with a bond forged in the fury of conflict and the quiet of shared survival. He was promised the cutest kitten, and in the end, he found something infinitely more, an alien catgirl whose fierce spirit matches his own, whose heartbeat resonates with his in the hush of a starless night, and whose raw, primal love may be the only spark of hope in a galaxy drowned in shadow. No cliffhangers remain. Their path is set, their choice made. The final traces of the old life fade behind them as they vanish into the stars, united in purpose and bound by a passion neither can deny. If anything lies beyond this moment, it's not a question of if they'll face it, but how, and whether the serpent coil can withstand the force of two warriors who have finally learned what it means to fight as one.